Hi guys, because I ran out of time with the Spanish Baroque video or Baroque Spain video, I decided to make a separate video for the Ultra Baroque in Mexico. So let's go through 3 examples of church architecture using this Ultra Baroque style. We'll be focusing in on structures the construction dates from between the 16th century into the 18th century. So you'll remember that we discussed 4 styles of the Baroque. So the dynamic ecstatic style, an example of that would be something like the baldacchino we saw in St. Peter's. We also have Baroque classicism, so using that Baroque using that classical architectural vocabulary or using classical iconography that is thinking about ancient Greece and Rome and then incorporating that into architectural structures or into artwork. So examples of Carracci's Loves of the Gods would be a nice Baroque classical example, or also St. Peter's Piazza, the piazza outside, using that Baroque or using that classical architecture. And then we also have Baroque realism, which would be a nice connection to works like Caravaggio and Ribera and Velázquez. But finally, we have this Ultra Baroque, which previously I've talked about as the Baroque on steroids. So let's go through a couple of examples in Mexico where you can really get a sense of this Baroque style being taken to the limit, and really every edge of these churches are decorated, especially when you get into the interiors, but in certain cases also on the exterior. So let's start off in one of the most famous structures in Mexico, considered one of the wonders, is the Chapel of the Rosary. And this is in a church called Santo Domingo. It's associated with the Dominican order, so that's a mendicant order or order of monks. And it's an order that was often associated with cities, so they would gather in cities as a way to create a faith community within the city and assist in the city. Inside this church, however, you can see how richly ornamented it is, and this idea of really encrusting every corner with this type of decoration. In this case, we have a kind of plasterwork that's gilded with gold. So the kind of richness or the material richness of Mexico is demonstrated in this church that's in Puebla. So we're in an area kind of close to Mexico City, so it's a very important colonial city. It includes paintings as well, so these churches often alternated between having rich sculptural decoration and then painting, and kind of alternating through the structure. This is a chapel that's part of a larger church, so it's just one small section of it, but as you can see, because it is so richly decorated, it has become an important tourist spot. The main tabernacle at the center, I will show you a close-up in just a minute, but it includes the Virgin Mary, also Saint Dominic, and the Archangel Gabriel. So you have this kind of triple layer tabernacle right at the center. Also, it includes other rich materials like marble columns on the corner of the tabernacle, and apparently there's also an onyx pulpit. So lots of valuable materials, really speaking to kind of this glowing quality inside the chapel. Because there's so much natural light coming in, people often describe it as having this glowing, rich quality, not only from the gold, but also from this natural light that plays off of the rich materials. So here's one other view where you can see up towards the dome, seeing that natural light entering in, and just a tip of the tabernacle there. And then one more view, just a close-up of that tabernacle, where again you can see the Archangel Gabriel, Saint Dominic, who's the leader of the founder of the order of the Dominicans, and then also the Lady of the Rosary. And so the Rosary was very important in Mexico because it was a method of converting and teaching the individuals in Mexico about Christianity. So by passing on this rosary and teaching the prayers of the rosary, it was a way of converting individuals to the faith. And the Virgin Mary was a nice path for bringing people into the religion. So many early chapels and churches in Mexico were dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And of course, the most important miracle image in Mexico is the Virgin of Guadalupe. So the Virgin also had this miracle quality associated with her. So that's one example. Let's go over to the Church of Santa Prisca, and also dedicated to Saint Sebastian. These individual saints were martyrs, so we're referring back to martyr saints, very, very popular, remember, in the Counter-Reformation, and very much emphasized this idea of offering one's life for the faith was very important, and might have been a way, again, of converting people into Christianity in Mexico. So remember, they're trying to bring people into the church. It was commissioned by the owner of a mine, so thinking again of the material richness of Mexico, the importance of mining. This is in the state of Guerrero, and it's in the city of Taxco. You can see the construction was concentrated in a very short time in the 18th century, in the 1750s. It was the tallest building in Mexico for about 50 years. As you can see, those towers really literally tower over the city and would have been very, very impressive. It was very expensive, even though the mine owner was very well off, Jose de la Borda. Even though he was very well off, this was apparently a very expensive project even for him. And apparently he wanted a great church there because his son was a priest and thought this would be a good place for his son to work and to give sermons. So let's zoom in on the facade. You get a nice sense of the grandeur of those two towers, the symmetry of the structure. You can see how narrow this structure is. It has this pink stone, but they had to keep it very, very narrow because apparently the ground was quite uneven. If we go back, you can see it is in kind of a hilly territory, but they kept it very, very narrow. But the effect of this is it makes the verticality of it even more dramatic, this idea that your eye has to go directly upwards, and it emphasizes the verticality. The architects were influenced by Spanish and French Baroque. So remember, a lot of these styles are coming in from Europe, but most of the individuals who are building them are actually native individuals who are from the area of Mexico and know building techniques from this area and also decorative techniques. So we often think about hybridity here, this idea of connecting what is native in Mexico with the styles from Europe. So we definitely see these examples as great cases of hybridity. As you can see, lots of decoration, especially in the central part of the facade over the portal. This idea of twisting columns, which we've already seen in St. Peter's. Also this idea of highly decorative towers. Also, if we go back one last time, you can see that a colorful tile work was also incorporated, and we'll see this in Puebla as well when we go back in just a second. If we zoom in on that main facade, you can see Santa Prisca and San Sebastian, or Saint Sebastian, the important saints associated with this church, but also a scene of baptism at center, and also a marker of papal approval, the papal keys here and the papal tiara. But this idea of baptism, again, very important with the idea of conversion of individuals coming into the church, baptism being the important first step as coming into the Catholic faith. So having that right at center above the portal would draw in everyone's attention. Entering into the church, you can see again that alternation of painting and sculpture and kind of turning the architecture into sculpture. There are many examples of floor-to-ceiling altarpieces here. So you can see this floor-to-ceiling altarpiece that are encased or gilded in gold. Also imagery of martyrdom and also images of the Passion included as well. There are altarpieces dedicated to Santa Prisca, San Sebastian, the Virgin of Guadalupe, and also the Virgin of the Rosary. And remember, we already talked about how the Virgin was so significant, and also how the Rosary was an important means of passing on the prayers and learning the prayers for those in Mexico. Okay, our last church is Santa Maria Tonantzintla, which is probably the best example of this case of hybridity, so dedicated to the Virgin Mary, but also referring to Tonantzin, the Aztec mother goddess. So this idea of combining those traditions, where the mother figure in Catholicism gets combined with the mother figure in Aztec culture. We're back in Puebla, in a small town in Puebla, in the area of Puebla, and then the construction here began in the 16th century. However, it took a very long time to build, and it's an incredibly ornate church. So on the outside you see the colorful tiles, but I can't wait to take you inside because there is this incredible stucco work as we enter in. So here you can see it. This is really that great case of Baroque on steroids, as you might say. Similar to the Chapel of the Rosary, you have a tabernacle at center, but all around it you have this amazing colorful stucco work. So really the color that's incorporated here is unprecedented. And this idea that you're using native artists or artisans who are coming in and decorating this, you get ideas of angels and individuals, but also fruit and flowers and imagery that might have been popular, was popular before the arrival of Catholicism. So this great idea of using this imagery to create an idea of heaven, an idea of beauty inside this church, a really transformative type of experience. Here's another view where you can really see every inch of the structure covered. So very, very impressive. Again, using that natural light to illuminate it, but rather than being like the Chapel of the Rosary, in this case, it's illuminated with color. Rather than the Rosary had the gold, here we're using all of these different colors on the stucco work. There's a close-up where you can see an individual figure with fruit and also what seems to be some type of headdress that may be incorporating feathers. So again, combining the two traditions of what is native to Mexico, but worshiping a figure that's associated with Catholicism, Saint Mary. Here's another case where you see what may be feathers, fruits, figures that might be angels, but again, this is one of the most impressive structures where you're really going in and you're experiencing the architecture and it's visually overwhelming you, which is very appropriate for that Baroque style.